Yeah. I'm Drew Thurlow. Who are you?
I'm Lauren Blitzer.
And this is the Lone Wolves Podcast.
Welcome. Hi, I'm Lauren Blitzer. I'm the founder of the Lone Wolves community and the former vice president of business development at Sony.
I'm Drew Thurlow, founder of Opening Ceremony Media, former senior vice president of A&R at Sony Music, and I'm glad to be here.
Welcome back, even though you've never been here before.
So we're going to talk about things in music tech, just kind of bullshit.
Music stories.
Maybe learn a little history. And I think the big news was Spotify's Loud and Clear report. We had a
Good job, Spotify.
Yeah, they do a really good job of patting themselves on the back, in which they do with this Loud and Clear report. And we had a discussion earlier before we started rolling about what side of the ethic line do we think Spotify's on? Are they good for artists? Do they have other more complaints that are legit against Spotify? I think we kind of have some differences of opinion there, but is that accurate?
Yes, but I also think that in general, the value of music has been distorted just in the general public of this idea that you can get it for free, although it's ad supported. So yes, there is revenue coming in, but I think that the misconception of people not really understanding what goes into a track or who gets to get paid out from that track based on what they participated in is a little skewed. So I think that's where my concern came from.
Yeah.
Anything.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a lot of the Spotify's bad for artists. It comes from people who don't really understand the economics of the music industry. But let's go through the report. I think, number one, we should recognize that this is a marketing initiative for Spotify. Mm-hmm. Just like Spotify Wrapped.
Yep.
They get everyone all excited over their data, and they don't actually really tell us anything super useful in their data. Spotify Wrapped is an annual opportunity for them to say, look how great we are. And
we're going to get everybody on their socials. It's just Spotify Wrapped, I will say, is kind of genius because it got everyone to rally to share. Exclusive merch was being done by artists. It's a really interesting campaign, and it's so quick. And then it's over. Yeah. And I feel like it celebrated artists too. Like, I'm a huge fan of Spotify.
Yeah, they do a good job there. So, and the reports are always like really graphically pleasing, and they're like fun to interact with. So, I mean, they some updates from them. So they now are paying out, they said they have paid nearly $60 billion to rights holders since they started their company. And of those $60 billion, $10 billion was just in 2024 alone. Wow. That's a lot. And they've grown, and they're showing that. They also say that of that $10 billion that they've paid out, 50% of it is to independent artists. My biggest criticism with that is how they define independent artists. And I think that those term indie and major was a lot more descriptive and accurate in the physical media era. Nowadays, we need other terms, because what's indie, what's major?
It's like indie labels, but if you're independent, you're not signed. So what are we talking about?
Yeah, and like if you're with the Orchard or AWOL or Virgin, you're independent, but you're owned by a major. In that $5 billion independent number, for example, is Taylor Swift, because she has a long-tail distribution deal with Universal. She's not signed. Her repertoire is not signed by Universal.
She did all of her masters to own it.
Yeah, but even then, those masters are distributed by Universal. So like,
they're distributed. Okay.
So, but like, she's not signed to Universal. It's considered indie, and I think BTS has a similar situation as Sony, as you know from working there. And so, yes, they're paying out a lot of music money to a lot of people, but like, let's put an asterisk besides that half of it is to independent artists. So, some impressive stat from Spotify's report is that of the top 10,000 earning artists on their platform, the number 10,000th of those artists earned $131,000 in 2024.
That's a living.
That's a lot of money. Yeah. And that, what actually trickles down to the rights holder and the writers and the recording artists from that 131,000, we don't know, because it's based on private agreements, but that's a lot. It's a lot of money. And in their report, they also mentioned that at the height of the CD era, record stores could handle up to about 50,000 CDs stocked at any one time, which is, back of the envelope math, that's probably like 5,000 artists. Well, now we have 10,000 artists making $131,000. Keep in mind that Spotify's about a quarter of the entire recorded music market. So if you're making $130,000 on Spotify, you're making probably that with the other DSPs, and you have touring and merch revenue. And so streaming has grown, and it's like affording a lot more people to make money from their music than ever before. So I would argue that Spotify has been really, really good for the music industry in that respect.
I only differ with that. Yeah, you make a good case, but I hear from a lot of artists it's maybe not about the distribution, the rev share that they're getting, but the original value that they put on music. Like X amount of cents per stream felt low. So, like putting that's sort of like the original deal was maybe devaluing music a little bit.
Probably. And I think
it shouldn't take this many. Like CD time obviously was great. It was like a hard cost, associated with CDs. It was $19 and you only had a CD. Now $19 a month gives you an entire family plan for every track ever created, basically. So I think that's kind of where it comes in. Yeah, it's a great platform. I mean, it's any artist can go in, like you said, and there's so many tools now for any artist to create music, which is wonderful. But it also really saturates that market too. It's like harder to get discovered.
Yeah, and I think one of the insights of the last year or two is that we in the industry have been putting streaming and Spotify in particular as a proxy for streaming and counting on them to be the recorded music solution. And I think we're learning that that's not going to work. And there's some really interesting startups trying to figure out other ways to monetize both master rights and publishing. And the super fan monetization gets thrown around a lot. It's a hot topic. What do you think about that as like an industry? And do you think there could be a tech solution to that, or does it going to require something else?
So I know we both know Eva in that platform. I like the idea that when the label's comfortable for almost releasing it early for super fans, like windowing that and being able to interact with the artists and get the merch and have this package deal that super serves super fans and allows the artist to not cannibalize anything on the streaming platforms once it's delivered, but get 50, 60, 70,000 extra dollars in revenue. And that feels to me like if we could kind of put those type of platforms in that doesn't really touch to me, then Spotify just feels like that library that you're going into that you can access, that anybody can access your music. But we have to figure out those other smaller things where you also get first party data from your fans, like stuff that you're not getting from Spotify as an artist, and real revenue. So I'm looking at platforms like that recently to see what is going to work, what's sustainable for the business too, is even making enough off of that to be able to staff and grow. So yeah,
Even's really interesting. I think Mag, who runs Even and founded it, is surprised as anyone as how successful they've been, because it's not a really super technically complicated platform. He's just offering artists a way to reach fans directly, having fans be able to get music early, get it in the format they want, interact with artists in interesting ways, and the artists get to keep all that first party data, which you're right, like they don't get that from streaming, even the labels don't get the granular data from.
And they don't want like Instagram and TikTok, all the stream DSPs, they don't want to give it away because then we have the power. It really is like a negotiation leverage should be saying, of course you have to partner with us. We know your fans and we'll keep that power. So we'll decide what goes up, on that, whatever it's, I've been out of the industry for too long. What's it called? The, Spotify, when like the artist that they promote, what's that, whatever that's called on top.
Is that the canvas? No.
Spotlight artists on Fridays. Like, they like argue over that slot,
Oh, yeah. But there's the release radar. Yeah.
So that those coveted spots for promotion and discovery, like that, they're like, we'll decide because we know what everyone's listening to. It's like, well, then, the labels or the artists are missing out because then they can't communicate to their audience correctly based on their streaming habits. Like, what else are they listening to? How are they listening to it? Where are they getting it from? There's a lot of things that, make the labels hyper focused on super fandom because they don't have it. They don't have the information and they want it.
And you know what's really interesting? And I heard this from a former curator at Spotify who was there for a long time. The programmers, curators, playlisters, the team of people they used to employ were responsible for up to 20% of all of Spotify's streams at one point. And that's when the streaming 1.0, that we're no longer in that, but that's when like the whole ecosystem around, we're going to sign an artist if we're a label, or if we're an artist, we're going to pitch the playlisting. We're going to pitch those people.
Yeah.
They're the gatekeepers to the streams and to the audience. And Spotify's, they still quietly have that apparatus. And they had an interesting article a few weeks ago about how they actually have a team of 130 worldwide now that still do that, which is bigger than I think most people realize. But Now the number of humans that are programming music for Spotify is now only driving, it's under 5% of all listens on Spotify. It's all algorithmic and programmatic, and they have these really complicated recommendation algorithms. A lot of them are driven by machine learning. They're effective. Users are staying on the platform. It's serving up music really well, but it just means that there's like no way for a human to game the system in the same way anymore. The label's value proposition in that regard is also declined and de-emphasized. So that's why the platforms like Even are really important, because you need that other layer of being able to manipulate like who you can talk to and what value.
Do it organically. It's like no algorithm's going to pick this next artist who will surprise everybody and, you know, get a lot of traction because they were uneven. It's like machine learn. It's great. AI is great, but it really does lack that human A&R that like is important.
Yeah. I mean, that's where I kind of disagree with you there, because the algorithms are really good. Like, they're like, they work. Like,
Some music is absolutely terrible.
Is it?
Oh my God. It was almost, I'm sorry. I will say, I know. Sorry. But I did a test like a year ago, and with some people at Sony Music, this Gen Z committee that we put together, because we were trying to figure out like how, you know, are there some helpful hints that we could give the platform to kind of like help them get more in line with Spotify and Apple Music. And if you listen to Miley Cyrus, so this was from a Gen Zer, and then it suggested Harry Styles, and they were like, okay, fine. Then it was like Moroccan club music was the next thing, and she was just like, nothing that I've ever listened to or have saved would ever indicate that, even in a discovery situation, would ever indicate that would be something that should be played next. And they were just like, it's garbage.
So that's interesting, because we talk about Spotify like it's a proxy for streaming, and it's really not. They have about 34% of the DSP market share, which is a lot, but Amazon and Apple together about that.
And YouTube.
And YouTube is bigger.
Yeah.
Right. So, but it's interesting because Spotify is the only platform, I think, that has a free tier, right? Isn't Apple Music and Amazon actually has a smaller free tier.
Does a free tier.
They have a free tier.
Yeah, the ad. Does Apple Music? I don't think
Apple Music does it. So it's just, yeah, they have like our internet radio.
Sir Nicole.
Yeah. They have a like a internet radio type, but you can't get like the latest repertoire or whatever, the latest thing on demand. So Spotify ends up like with that bigger funnel and more people.
Yeah.
But I wonder, do you think it's just Amazon like doesn't care? Because they obviously have the technical chops to build better recommendation algorithms.
I think they don't care. I think they're in the game, but like when you think about the whole Amazon ecosystem, this is like probably creating like debt for them. Like this is not like a profitable, you know, they have like obviously their huge e-commerce platform. Whole Foods, I think, was one of their more profitable acquisitions. Like Amazon Music is probably not.
It's just like there to fill a role and
they're now spending money on rights, on like merch rights. Like they got the Cats rights, and they have like an exclusive on Beyonce touring merch, and so they're definitely like, you know, but they realize like this is our strong suit. Like we have factories, we know how to manufacture, fulfill.
That's interesting, because one of the things that Universal got dinged for in their earnings report last year was that they grew their merch business.
Yeah.
But it was like, that's not the margins you're looking for. The margins are bad as opposed to streaming. And why would anyone double down on merch if the margins are so bad? The answer is, if you're Amazon, you can manufacture and distribute this stuff really at scale.
Right.
A lot better.
The only issue is the quality was not great on both of those. Like they know how to do all of that, but they also need to like balance that with actual, like, not the cheapest t-shirt in the world. So there's a middle ground there in terms of merch. But I think at least for independent artists, it's a good place to go, because there's so many, again, like there's so many tools to like creator tools to use for creating music. There's also creator tools to use for merch that's relatively cheap.
Yeah.
Make good margins if you're selling it from your basement.
Yeah, and there's some interesting startups in the merch space too. Mm-hmm. Softside, I believe, So they are. Tell me a little bit about them, because I know that they're a growing and kind of DIY merch, and they have a technical solution to stuff. But what do you know about Softside?
What I know, and I have not spoken to Erin in a while, but she started out wanting to create a platform for fans to come in and create merch from licensed IP. So she would get, let's say she went to an artist like J. Cole and got, 16 images pre-approved, and then the fans could actually make the merch from there, and the artist would get a cut of it as well. So it was all like, created that was inappropriate or whatever, would go through an approval process. I know that was like probably a year and a half ago. So I wonder, like, at this point, I've just seen on LinkedIn that she's getting some traction in hiring. So I wonder, like, if there's that system, because I always got caught up in like the approval part, because anything that requires approvals takes a long time and it's hard to scale.
Yeah, yeah.
How is that more turnkey now?
That's interesting. And media has done some really good research on what they consider to be like really engaged fans. I hate to use that word super fan again, but it's accurate. And they define it as the top 20% of all music listeners. And they've done some great research on how much these fans want to interact with their artists and the music in interesting ways. And that includes like engaging with audio, with AI tools and separating stems to listen. It also includes making custom merch on their own. And they want to do all that stuff. And I think the industry is like open to it now.
They're open to it outside of Etsy. Like, people were just doing it on Etsy and selling it illegally. You do need to like acquire a license.
Yeah.
And stuff. And that, I think it's hard to like do cease and desist for all of those items that are on Etsy. So why not create a platform that kind of gets rid of that, ambiguity when it comes to like what's legal? But you're right. Again, the word super fan, the thing I've learned about talking to different super fan platforms too is super fans are fans 12 months a year, not just when the artist puts out music.
Yeah.
And the labels, I think, sometimes forget that while they care so much about the first 2 weeks and if there's market share and if they're streaming and if they're charting, after that, the fans still want stuff in the year that the artist is not producing anything. They want it even more. So why not continue to think holistically about this artist? What else do they do? What else do they like? What other items can we put out? Because fans are hungry for it. They have money. They want to spend it. And it's like, that should be a priority too.
Yeah. And that's where like the one size fits all super fan strategy isn't going to work.
It's not.
Because by definition, a super fan is kind of a unique bespoke thing. And what a K-pop super fan wants is not the same as what a Bob Dylan super fan want. And a lot of it a lot of super fan stuff doesn't deal with IP. So labels can't really cash in on it. It's like access to concert tickets early or special merch or an NFT or a cameo type feature. It's not really anything with the music. So
like recorded music, you're right.
And so Warner's, which is run by Robert Kinsel, you came from YouTube, they've done a pretty dramatic thing over the last couple of years and really tried to pivot to being a tech organization. And they I've never met so many machine learning engineers and product people at a major before. And one of the things that they announced was, we're going to build this superfan app. And it's going to be this tech solution for our artist roster to capture more value from the fans. And they like worked on it for a year, and they were talking about some demos, and there was some underground chatter about how everyone was excited about it. And then they kind of quietly sunsetted the idea. So I don't know what all those tech people are going to be doing at Warner's now, but that's these fans need to be served. There's money, the industry's leaving money on the table, but I don't think it's like going to be this one size fits all. No. That's going to work for everyone.
It has to be empowering them too. I think there's a company called Fave, and Jaquel's doing a good job of figuring out how to empower fans. She's going to create the platform, but she's going to empower the fans to do the events on the ground. They have nothing, the artist doesn't even need to be there. They want to gather as super fans that their social identity is that artist. They have Ed Sheeran in their, icon on Instagram. Like that, this is who they are. And they just want to be together and gather and talk about trivia about that artist, listen to music together. That's what she's trying to do, is empower them to continue to do that on the merch side as well.
Okay. Yeah, I know Fave a little bit. And does she need the artist buy-in in any capacity, or like what is...
Only if needed, only if like IP is being used, or if, I think she's gone to the label a few times for like extra vinyl and stuff to send to the fans, which was like, left whatever is in a closet at a record label of old merch. Is they have no idea how much that means to a fan to get a hat in the mail from their favorite artist. Yeah. From the record label too. They feel connected to the experience.
Yeah. So I'm sure Ed Sheeran's going down to the local post office and like dropping this, but it's no hat into the mail.
Like that's one step closer. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, having conversations with someone that had conversations with the label is like one step closer to the artist. So it's an interesting approach, and it is not a one size fits all. Yeah. Different fandoms are different too in the way they operate.
So let's switch to publishing for a second. And we don't talk a ton about publishing in the industry. And there's a good reason why. The master side or the label side is about 4 to 5 times as big as the publishing industry. So it's just not a big of a business. It employs fewer people. A lot of writers don't have the kind of public facing personas like artists do. So they're not really in the public eye. But one of the things that Spotify announced in their report is that they are now paying $2.5 billion to the publishing industry. That's a really interesting figure. Do you know about the lawsuit between the Mechanical Licensing Collective and Spotify over the last year?
I don't. And I'm wondering, have they always paid out publishers?
Yes.
Like I thought that so is that figure is higher than it was?
It's higher.
Okay.
There's, obviously Spotify and the DSPs in general have grown the boat, but publishing is really complicated because there are two sides to the publishing copyright. Right. There's public performance. That's what PROs collect. Mm-hmm. Most countries, every country in the world besides the US, essentially has one PRO. And the United States has essentially 4, 2 at scale.
EMI and ASCAP are like the biggest.
Yeah. So they are responsible for collecting the public performance side of publishing copyright. Mechanicals is a separate publishing copyright. And Mechanicals is collected in the United States by a new organization called the Mechanical Licensing Collective that was founded after a music omnibus bill was signed into law in 2018. Before that, Harry Fox Agency was the main collector of mechanicals in the US, who now confusingly is owned by a PRO called CSAC. And Harry Fox still collects on behalf of the MLC. The MLC funds, I think about 40% of their budget is actually outsourced to Harry Fox to continue to do what they do.
Right.
The way publishers get paid on Spotify is through a percentage of revenue. So every 4 years, anyone who needs a mechanical license to play music, radio stations, digital radio stations, streaming services, go before this three panel of judges, and they make their case of like, what should you pay for mechanicals? And the judges set the rates. Spotify's rates are based on a percentage of their revenue. They're allowed to deduct some overhead, but essentially Spotify has to pay 15.35% of their revenue to the publishing pool, and then it gets divvied up what's from there. What Spotify did last year was they created a new tier of subscriber. They have a audiobook plus music tier. Mm-hmm. But what they did was decided that pool of money that they calculate that 15.35%, they decided that pool of money is now cut in half. We're still going to honor the rate court CRB percentage, but half of this money now is actually not to music. It's for the audiobook portion. It was a little shady.
That does sound very shady.
And they were able to do this because there's bundling clauses in these agreements. And you're probably familiar with these with your time at Sony. With any streaming service, Netflix, Hulu, they have these bundling carve-outs where if you're a family plan or you're a student plan, you can get a different royalty rate and bundle users together. Yeah. Well, they used that interpretation of that clause to get away with this. And they only tried to do this in the United States because streaming isn't really regulated here like it is in Europe. Obviously, the Mechanical License Collective were like really pissed. They sued Spotify, and that went on. And I think Spotify, the back of the envelope calculation by those on the outside thought that Spotify would save $150 million a year by paying essentially publishers less based on this bundling clause interpretation. So it was interesting to see that even though this was in place last year, they still ended up paying publishers more because they've grown the pie just that much more. Now, there was a resolution. While the MLC sued Spotify, they actually won the lawsuit. Spotify was legally compliant with this new clause. But I think it was the week before the lawsuit was decided, they did do a direct deal with Universal, have since done with Warner's, and will be doing them with Merlin and Sony, to pay mechanicals directly, and it's pretty much back to the rate of where it was. Yeah. So even though Spotify won the lawsuit, like your Spotify, like you don't want to piss off the songwriters.
Right.
Like that was bad. Like
it's shady.
It's shady. And like the publishers were like pissed, and the songwriters were boycotting Spotify's Grammy parties, and Spotify's got to go before these rate court judges again later next year, and that just wasn't going to go well for them. So everyone's cool now. Spotify gets to say, hey, we're paying you more than legally we have to. Songwriters are back to being like, fine, you resolved it. They seem to be getting the rate they want. So which is really interesting that streaming continues to grow. Even though Spotify cut the amount of money they were paying in this pool in half for much of last year, the entire pool grew so much that it was actually still more. So
it's great.
Yeah. So it's
beyond the shady business.
Yeah.
Which isn't great at all.
Yeah. But it's an interesting outcome, and they're going to continue to do this. But streaming growth is slowing. It's slowing in the US, slowing in Western Europe. Those are the really valuable consumers. So like next year is going to be super interesting. Like they're signing up people like crazy in Latin America and Far East in Africa. But it's for every person you sign up in Vietnam, you need 20 of them to equal the value that one person in Sweden. So I don't know. We'll see how this goes this year. Lone Wolves Podcast is hosted by Lauren Blitzer-Wright and me, Drew Thurlow. Music by me, Drew Thurlow. Lone Wolves Podcast is produced by Nicole Marinake.
For more information about the Lone Wolves, you can email me at lauren@lonewolvesclub.co or visit us online at www.lonewolvesclub.co.